And then one of the questions I have on some of the theological is the question of suffering. Why does God allow suffering? And the Mormon girl said, God is testing you. I said, you're walking into an assisted living place where my mom's a resident. Who is God testing? My mother? Is it testing me? How dare he? People that put an emphasis on these trance-like states, these high meditation states, eating a pizza can be just as mystical experience as these high jhana-like states. And if you think about what's going on, all the brain signals that are triggered when you eat pizza, it's eating a slice of pizza is just as much as part of the mystery as attaining a high jhana state. And there's less, Zen would call it like enlightenment stink about, pizza than there is about, high attainment states.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, I think, come away from that experience saying this person is only their memories. And once you lose the memory, then they're not the same person anymore, in the sense that, they're just, there's nothing there, and you can explore this in the realm of like thought experiments, like if you do a memory transfer from one body to another. But what you're saying is that, there's a sense of there's something else beyond memories, which persists. I'm here with Wolf. Wolf is the author of a wonderful book titled Wolf's Guide to Dharma Books and Practice, which you can find linked below. And it's really a pleasure to be talking to you today, Wolf. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me on, Amakai. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this.
Wonderful. Yeah, your book, it's long book, and every time I've dipped into it, I feel like I've really gained something. And I love your voice and your style and what you've collected there. So I guess my first question for you is just sort of like, what has been your path and your journey in life?
Yeah. In the early 90s, I was teaching English in Taiwan. And when that ended, 93, I took a trip to Tibet, and I thought, well, it's almost a cliche. People will ask, well, you went to Tibet, did you get enlightened? And nothing really happened. I enjoyed the trip. And spirituality and wisdom traditions was like going to the gym for me. It was something like, okay, yeah, it's kind of cool to do, but it really wasn't a huge part of my life until about 2010. There was this girl I was talking with, and I saw on her profile, she said she was a Buddhist. And so to better talk to her, I saw this video on YouTube, Rabina Curtin, Be Your Own Therapist. And it's a really good video, and it's a Google talk. And she says, okay, we're going to take off our nun hat, spirituality hat, and we're going to put on our science of the mind hat. And I found that her aspect of teaching Buddhism as a science of mind was really interesting. And so I Googled, and I found that she was teaching an introduction to Buddhism course in Dharamsala, India. And it corresponded with Tibetan New Year's talk that the Dalai Lama was going to be giving. And usually these introduction to Buddhism at Tashita courses are like 10 days, but because the Dalai Lama was going to be giving the New Year's talk, it was only 5 days, which at that time was very attractive to me because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do 10 days. 10 days for a meditation retreat sounded like, well, after a few days, you might get tired of it. And I'd had DVTs in my legs, and I found sitting to be very painful. 10 minutes, my legs would be just screaming. So if it's a whole day sitting, I don't know if I could handle it. So just being 5 days was perfect for me. But the Tashita Introduction to Buddhism course, the Galupa branch, which is what the Dalai Lama is and what Tashita is, they don't emphasize meditation at all. And it's more like a university course, like they have a lecture in the morning and a lecture in the afternoon. They have a guided meditation, but it's just maybe 1 hour a day. A discussion group, so you meet other people and you make friends. And it was really good experience. I traveled around India a bit and went down to Tiruvannamalai, but it was near the end of the season, so it was really hot. A lot of the satsangs had ended. And then I came back I went to a Mahasi Sayadaw center in Nepal, Pandita, which was really good, and did a 1 month Vipassana retreat there, and it kind of solidified my practice. Like before that, I'd go to these Buddhist talks, and they'd say, okay, we're going to do meditation, and today we're going to meditate on this. And the next time it would be something else. Like, okay, when I go home, how does this translate into a daily practice? Like, do I do the same meditation? Do I switch up meditations? Do I switch them every week? Like, practically, how does this work? And the Vipassana retreat at Pandita really solidified it. I became a lot more confident in my practice. And while I was there, I got an email. My mom had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and she'd been placed in assisted living. So I went home, and for the next 3 years, I visited her almost every day, 2 out of 3 days. And that was a very rewarding experience. I think if people spent 6 months in a spiritual center in quiet, the world would be a different place. But if people had the opportunity to spend time in like an assisted living place, that it would be a very good thing for people. And I learned a lot, visiting my mother during this time. And I think this group of senior citizens, they're one of the few groups that they'll just sit and do nothing. And everybody else has to take out their cell phones and start, looking at them. And when my mom, we went outside and sat in a chair with some other people outside the entrance, and just sitting there. And, I could use that time to just do 5-minute reflection of the mind, a short, meditation there. So, and I spent, when she passed away, after the estate kind of settled, I went back to India and Asia. And at that point, I really kind of embraced the path of being a Dharma bum. And I think being a Dharma bum is kind of an interesting path, because I think a lot of people aren't aware that this could be an option, that you can go from that. India has these places like Rishikesh. Rishikesh has a season, and in season, there's a lot of yoga events, talks happening. There's a lot of Advaita Vedanta things happening. When the mountains get cold, the plains, Bodh Gaya, which is where the Buddha became enlightened, a lot of the Tibetans come down there, and there's a lot of events happening there. And when that gets hot, people will move up to the mountains, like Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives, and there'll be a lot of events, teachings, happening there. So depending on the season, you can kind of go from place to place to place, and travel and see some sights, but also receive kind of teachings. And Dharma kind of became my hobby of it. And there's a Zen center in South India that I really liked, and I was spending a lot of time there. And because I'd been there before, they asked me to give the tours to new people and explain like where the bathrooms are, where you can get, purified water. And people would say, well, are you living here? Are you like a permanent resident? I'd say, no, I'm not a permanent resident. Do you work here? Is this your job? No, it's not my job. I'm just like them. I'm a visitor, but I've had some experience. And so I started calling myself, I'm just a Dharma bum. I'll spend a good length of time at the Zen center, but then I may go to a Vipassana retreat or Neo-Advaita satsangs or a yoga camp, something else. And I met with Christopher Titmus, and I mentioned about being a Dharma bum, and he had a different insight into it, that he liked the term, and he said he thought that was kind of like what the original followers of the Buddha did, that before Buddhism became institutionalized and there's all these rules, they had these distinctive robes, they were just traveling from teacher to teacher to receive teachings. And I like that, because if we talk about cults, and one of the signs of cults is people will inflate themselves, and they may give themselves an inflated title. And I think calling myself a Dharma bum is a good thing, because it's a little bit self-effacing, but it also describes kind of, I think, my path pretty well.
Yeah. So concretely, I mean, you've written this book, which is a wonderful guide, a beginner's guide, and you've had all these experiences. Concretely, for someone who's very skeptical, or for someone to whom this is like totally foreign, why? Like, why meditate? Why follow a spiritual path at all? What's the advantage? What's the value in any of this?
Yeah. Well, what's the value of reflection in one's life? Eventually, uh, in people's lives, people make questions saying, "What is this all about?" And I heard a story of I think it was Robert Thurman, and he had a young student in one of his Buddhism classes, and she came up to him after class and said, "I understand everything you're talking about Buddhism, but I don't understand this emphasis on suffering. I don't see suffering in life much at all." And Thurman said, "You shouldn't. You're young, but as you get older and you see everything that you love disappear, change, and die, then the question of suffering becomes more impactful, and how to deal with this. Why is there suffering?" And the I think in the West, we a lot of people have gotten turned off of traditional religions, and Buddhism is a fast growing religion in the U.S. that can appeal to people, and it has a big emphasis on suffering. Like when I was visiting with my mom, there's these Mormon girls that were going in at the same time I was. We are going to call the bingo game. And so, they're the Mormon missionaries. And so they ask me, they're very friendly. And they one of the questions is, well, do you belong to any church? And I said, no. So this puts me as a prime candidate for them to talk to and convert, because I'm not involved. But I told them I'm probably one of the worst people you can talk to about this, because I'm skeptical about whether there is an ultimate creator God. I'm skeptical about this is the same one that's in the Bible. And then for you guys, I'm skeptical that the Book of Mormon is the reestablishment of God's connection to humans. So you've got three huge hurdles to climb on this. And then one of the questions I have on some of the theological is the question of suffering. Why does God allow suffering? And the Mormon girl said, God is testing you. I said, you're walking into an assisted living place where my mom's a resident. Who is God testing? My mother? Is it testing me? How dare he? There's Sims, which is like a simulated computer game where people control human beings' lives. Sims does not have their characters randomly get cancer. If they did, people would rebel and say, what the hell? The designers, you guys are cruel and sick for having this. And I think this is one thing that Buddhism can kind of give a different perspective on, that can help people when they have spiritual questions. What I've seen sometimes traveling a lot is, in the West, people are in such a toxic environment that they're not even aware it's toxic. We've lost connections with family. Traditional religion is on the decline. People can be in a soul-sucking job. People move away. They move away from friends and family to where they're isolated and lonely. It's not the way human beings evolve. We were small hunter-gatherer tribes for most of our evolution. And our diet sometimes is very poor. It's our social media is designed to upset people. And sometimes the message coming from some self-help gurus, which I disagree with, is, well, your mind determines reality. Your mind will determine whether you're happy or not. And we're not even aware of these influences on ourselves.
Yeah. But to turn the question back at you, because you asked a great question to these Mormon girls. So what is the Buddhist answer to suffering in this world? I mean, we all suffer, and people in the audience suffer. So what's the answer to that?
Yeah, what I would answer is, it's because of the Buddha had a philosophy, said the Dharma is dependent origination. The reason why they're suffering is because of causes and conditions. And I would find this very hard to disagree with. If someone is of a scientific mind, it's because the reason why a young couple has a child with cancer, it's not because of their karma. It's not because they attracted it some way. It's because cancer happens. There's things in genetics. There's things in various and sundry influences where cancer develops.
So it's interesting, but is this helpful though? So let's say, let's say we all suffer. Let's say I'm suffering today, so I guess there's two questions you can ask. So one question you answer, one question is, where does it come from? And so, the answer is, well, it comes from causes. That's a valuable, scientifically acceptable answer. But therefore what? So what would the Mormon girls say? The Mormon girls might say, well, come to church and read the Book of Mormon, and you'll feel great. You won't suffer as much or something. But is that an acceptable answer in the Buddhist tradition, or how does Buddhism deal with suffering practically?
I think the nice thing about Buddhism is there's a wide range of solutions that Buddhism gives. It's a toolbox. There's tons of recipes, and depending on, there's a wide variety of suffering people can go to. Somebody can just be having a bad day, in which case goes, you like to bicycle. You love bicycling. Why don't you go on a bicycle ride? And maybe that resolves, the issue. Now, if the person's facing an abusive partner, then just saying, why don't you go on a bike ride? It's not going to be helpful. And that's a key question, is like, it's on a case by case basis. And I like there's what's called the Stockdale paradox. And Admiral Stockdale was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And they asked him, said, well, who made it in this harsh conditions and who didn't? And interestingly, he said the optimists were the ones who did not make it because they thought, okay, early release is coming, and they died of a broken heart. And Stockdale's takeaway was, you must face the harsh reality and facts, always keeping that ultimately you will be successful. So maybe one needs to reflect, like if you're in a soul-sucking job and your boss is abusive, you could go to a mindfulness course. It might help somewhat. However, the root problem that you're in this terrible job, maybe you need to address, like, okay, I need to look for another job. I need training to find another job on this.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that perspective a lot, because you can find so many self-help gurus on the internet and in books that will tell you, suffering is all just a construction of the mind, so that you can find, bliss and ecstasy in any environment. And ultimately what that can do is, I feel like that can lead people to be very complacent, not make good decisions, in their life that are necessary.
Yeah, I agree. To my mind, it's almost like malpractice. And the book 1984,
Sure,
which is a horrible dystopia. And when he's being tortured and they put that cage with the rat over his head, it's just terrifying. It's a bad situation. And the only thing I think that could make it worse was if there was some guru, self-help guru there saying, look, it's only bad if you think it's bad. If you want to love Big Brother, then you will love Big Brother. Think 2 + 2 = 5, and that becomes your truth. That if we'd had this cult of mind reality, I think Orwell would have possibly included it when he wrote the book, because it would have made it even worse. I would say, open up the rat cage. I'm done. I can't take this bullshit anymore.
Yeah. I think that's what we could talk about. Red flags when talk about spiritual teachers, and I guess that this is, I think, a major red flag, which is a kind of a narrow focus on like individual self-help, individual self-actualization, in exclusion to like all the things that influence our lives, in exclusion to like the conditions and the relationships and the economic social, political factors, which have a huge impact on our ability to flourish and ability to be happy and things like that. Would you agree with that?
Totally. Even something very small, like Adyashanti, who's a teacher I kind of like, he mentioned he was sick for years, and he found out it was because of aluminum in his antiperspirant. And I saw this, and I thought this was very interesting. This guy was feeling unwell and having health issues, and they find, to my mind, this is great detective work. He was a band player, and in his clarinet, they found fungus in his mouthpiece, and this shows like there's a mind-body connection here. And to ignore that and think, okay, if you decide to be happy, that's the only thing you need to be happy. It may work, but it may not. And if you look at people, counselors, professional therapists, it's considered it's not helpful to tell somebody who's clinically depressed, well, why don't you just decide to be happy?
Yeah.
There's these New Yorker cartoons that I like where the person's drowning. He's got his hand just above the water, and the person's talking to him, say, well, focus on the positive.
Right.
And a woman being burned at the stake, the caption is, have you considered yoga?
Right.
And sometimes I think, this spirituality are concerned with platitudes and easy solutions to difficult problems.
Yeah. 100%. A more informational question, just if possible, for people like me who have no knowledge, no direct experience, no education in any of these things. So there's like different branches. There's like different schools of Buddhist thought and Buddhist tradition. So from what I understand, there's the Zen school, the Zen tradition. There's a Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and there's like a Vipassana tradition. Maybe there's others. Can you sort of speak to the variety of traditions and maybe sort of like how you think about those schools and differences between them?
Sure. I'm a Dharma bum, so I attend teachings in all of them. Sometimes I change my vocabulary, like if you say the wrong word, like if you mention the word soul, the Buddhists will rush to react and say there is no permanent unchanging soul. But if you say, well, Buddha nature, oh yeah, there's Buddha nature, and people have their pet terms. I find a lot of commonality in them, and a good teacher will communicate to their audience, and I put more on the teacher than what sect they may be appearing from. Like in Dalai Lama's teaching, even though he's Tibetan Buddhist, Mahayana, a lot of times there's Theravadan monks there receiving teachings too. And the Zen center that I like a lot in South India, it's run by the Jesuits. And when I first heard this, I go, the Catholic Jesuits? And they go, yeah. I said, I was skeptical. I said, why would Catholics be running a Zen center? Aren't they competing like religions? Like, what next? They're going to say, the Catholics are going to say, we're going to start a Protestant church. We think we can do it a little bit better than you guys. But it works. And sometimes on Reddit, I've seen people say, well, can I be a Buddhist and be a Christian? And sometimes people reply and go say, no, they're incompatible. Well, the Zen masters at Bodhizendo are Jesuit fathers. They don't seem to have an issue with such compatibility. So I'm not very sectarian in that, drawing firm lines of this. And I also think people are very flexible when it comes to holding different beliefs in their own head. They may seem like there's some incompatibility between this, but people can have a love for different things. There are definitely there's differences in things, and at Bodhizendo they don't try to make the Zen Christian, and they don't try to make the Christianity Zen. They're separate things, and there's characteristics of them, like in the Mahayana, which is Zen is part of. they tend to stress bodhicitta and compassion and being a bodhisattva, helping others. A lot of times in like the Galupa, there's a huge emphasis on emptiness and the philosophy of emptiness. And what I find useful and interesting about kind of cross training and receiving teachings from different traditions is if you don't fully grok what emptiness is from the philosophical point of view in one tradition, another tradition teaches it from a different way. And then Zen will say, look, it's just words, just sit and look at emptiness yourself and try to understand it on a personal level. And I think these different aspects, these different ways of looking at it can be useful to understand, difficult subjects. And also I think it's useful because you see what's universal kind of in Buddhism. And then like for Tibetan Buddhism, you say, okay, this is what Tibetan Buddhists believe. And this is what Galupa branch of Tibetan Buddhists believe. That's different than maybe other branches of Tibetan Buddhism. And then there's sometimes what the individual teacher or Lama may believe. And then there's sometimes cultural beliefs. And I've had teachings sometimes by Tibetan teachers who, when they were introduced to Buddhism, they fell in love with Tibetan Buddhism, and they teach everything as if this is
the only
Buddhism.
way. Yeah.
Everybody believes this. And I really like the FPMNT, like the Introduction to Buddhism course, which is Introduction to Buddhism. It doesn't say Introduction to Galupa Tibetan Buddhism. And then they have a day where they talk about emptiness. And the Galupa will say, this is kind of a Galupa point of view, is that emptiness is emptiness. Things do not inherently exist. And don't try to reify emptiness. Don't try to find anything that's behind the curtain of emptiness. And sometimes people will come away and think, this is what Buddhists believe. And they may have a point of view of more like nihilism, which is a danger of, of this particular view.
Sure. Okay. So let's say, someone's a beginner. I mean, I certainly consider myself a beginner, and is looking to start a practice. What advice would you give to someone starting off, for like, let's say an early, beginner, say brand new, trying to less getting interested in Buddhism, but more getting involved in interested in meditation, which is sort of my personal interest as it happens to be. So what would you say to a person like that? What advice would you give them?
Yeah. I think exploration is very good. You look at different teachers, look at different methods, and there's a wide variety of sources on YouTube. A lot of times what I recommend for people for meditation is Sam Harris's app, Waking Up. I find that's, very well done program there. There's also other different programs people can, Jack Kornfield has beginning mindfulness program. We're kind of in a golden age of electronic media where people can learn from great teachers there.
What would your program look like?
In my program, I have 7 in the book that you refer to. I have different units, and the first unit I have is I think I call it happiness, yoga, and developing a daily practice. And it kind of has a survey of different teachers, all the different branches of Buddhism that people can start looking at and seeing, well, I really like when Rupert Spira, talks about things. I have a real connection with his teachings, that they can kind of get introduced to different views of the practice and the path. And I also think yoga is very beneficial, and it's kind of if people will just do 10 minutes of yoga a day, 10 minutes of meditation, I think after a few months, they'll find there's been very positive aspects of it. And I like the happiness as first unit, because most people, they want to end suffering and they want to be happy. And if they look at, well, what's the research on what are good happiness practices that they can integrate into their life, I think it's great to have some sort of daily practice where you have a quiet reflection, contemplation, or meditation. But the real key is taking that off the mat and having that having your practice influence your life. How do we do that?
Can you have the influence without the practice, right? Let's say I wanted a, because meditating takes a lot of time, you know. Is it possible to listen to the lectures and read the books and not so much practice? What do you get? What does the practice offer that the books can't offer?
It's a good question. I think you definitely can. I think it may help if you've had some practice at some form of your life, you know, that you've got a base of that. But like the Galupa people, the Tashida Center, they don't emphasize meditation much at all. And I was at one of their seminars, and they said they were going to do some meditation, and they started stretching their arms out and flexing them, and then the guy started talking about it, and I asked some friends afterwards. I go, "Is it just me? I don't remember doing any meditation. What happened to the meditation?" They go, "Well, that flexing arm bit, that was the meditation." I go, that was just so short. And they say, sometimes I've heard them say any meditation more than 5 minutes can be dangerous. This is a point of view. If you ask Vipassana people who sit for hours at a time, they would chuckle at this. But you know, the Galupa people don't put an emphasis. Their emphasis, the Galupa are known for, is scholarship, readings that you can read from these great teachers and you can gain insight on them. If you look at Advaita Vedanta, they say the root problem is ignorance. How do we get rid of ignorance? You get through knowledge. And they say meditation can help prepare you. You need to be open to receive this knowledge. But they give a story of the 10th man, where these boys are traveling, and they cross the river, and then they want to make sure none of the boys were swept away and drowned. And when they count, they only count 9 because they don't count themselves. And they're wailing, they're in grief because they think they lost one of their group. And then a man comes along and says, what's the problem? And the boys explain, and the man catches on to what the issue is, and then he counts for them, and he counts the 10th boy. And one of the takeaways on this, that, well, if the boys, when they realized this problem, if they started praying or they started meditating, would this have resolved their suffering? No, not really. The best way was the knowledge of they were suffering from delusion and correcting that.
I love that. I really love that. Yeah. And yeah, it reminds me of sort of like a conflict or a tension that I felt in some environments, in some cases, where again, talking about these gurus or these sort of self-help, the self-help, you know, culture, where there's a passivity that is sort of inculcated by some of these ideologies, but whereas the importance is to in addition to maybe a meditation practice, sort of inner looking, is also an outer looking, which needs to be correct. You know, you need to see the world properly. Otherwise, you're in danger of all sorts of, you know, misperceptions that can lead to all sorts of, you know, like terrible outcomes. So I love that. Here's another question. So I follow a bunch of YouTube channels. I have your wonderful book, which I'm you know, working through. I've read plenty of, you know, other different books here and there. So you know, from the YouTube channels that I've read, so we're talking like a very, you know, small sample size of a distant kind of, you know, secondhand reflection. You know, if I think of like a caricature of like a Zen meditation, you know, so I think of teachers that I've saw on YouTube, for example, or books that I've read, or talk about, you know, like good for nothing sitting, or like just sitting with like no purpose. You just sit, you know. And if I think of sort of Tibetan meditation in the Tibetan Buddhism, I think of you know, a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh that I've read or listened to. He has all sorts of, you know, visualization exercises, like you imagine, visualize yourself as clear water, you know, reflecting reality, or visualize stable as a mountain, and all sorts of, you know, sort of mantras or different ideas that you can sort of meditate on. What I've wondered for a while, because I just haven't had any really contact with it, is what is Vipassana? What's like a stereotypical kind of like Vipassana insight meditation idea?
Well, I think I can speak to Vipassana as a participant. Vipassana is a broad thing, because I've heard some people say, well, Vipassana doesn't have like these casino meditations. Oh no, Vipassana, it's a broad field. But when you go to a Vipassana center, they may, like they asked me, they go, how are you about meditating on your breath? I go, I'm fine with meditating on the breath. Go, let's go there. And, breath work, breath meditation, it's very common. There's mindfulness of breathing. It was recommended by the Buddha. The Buddha said if he was to live for like 10 more lifetimes, he still would only just scratch the surface of mindfulness of the breath. Now, I had a fear issues because when I would do a long retreat at Pandita Rama, there was daily reports. And there's a German monk who, bless him, he's lived decades there, tons of experience. And he expects a daily report on your breath. And, if you think about talking about your breath for the first week or two, you find things. But if you're staying there for a long time, for 2 months, I found sometimes I have this fear of, I don't have anything to say about the breath. I've said it all. I'm trying to think of synonyms for the breath. It's kind of cool, crispy. I'm done here. And one time I go, I'm not going to make something up. Like sometimes I'd have a couple of insights and I think I should save 2 of these insights for when I don't have anything to report. And I go, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, we become so, we have this cultural upbringing of, we want to please the teacher. And we're not being graded by this, and I think, okay, it is what it is. If I have a good day, I'm going to mention this is what happened with me. If it's a bad day, I said, honestly, I don't have anything about the breath. I was just sitting there and no thoughts occurred to me. And the Venerable said, that won't do. So, oh God, okay. Next report, I should endeavor to have something to report about the breath. And they said, put the breath under a fine-tooth microscope. Look at beginning, middle, and ending aspects of the in-breath. Look at beginning, middle, and ending aspects of the out-breath. And at Pandita Rama, a lot of the yogis keep a journal. And I recommend that too. So after a sit, you have some thought, you can write it down. So when you go to the interview, you can report on it. I've done a lot of retreats there. Now I'm better at it because if I don't have anything on the breath, I'll just start talking about my walking meditation because they like walking meditation too. And it's only 10 minutes. I can talk about my walking meditation experience enough for me to slide by, but yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's really amazing. Wow. Just focusing on the breath and having to report on the breath on a regular basis. That's really interesting. Wow. Okay. What is enlightenment? What does it mean to be enlightened?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I've been around the Dharma path for over a decade now, and enlightenment. I don't like the word enlightenment. I'm skeptical when anybody says they're enlightened. They can say they've had a spiritual experience. I think that's cool. They can maybe say they've had an awakening, but enlightenment, from what I understand, it's like a Western word that was put on this Eastern concept. And different branches, different people have a different definition of what enlightenment is. The Tibetan Buddhists, it's pretty high flung. If you're enlightened, you have cities, you have powers, you can walk through walls, you can fly. I heard somebody say, well, they went to Tenzin Palmo, who was an English nun who spent 12 years in a cave in Spiti Valley. And she said, look, it's not going to happen for almost all of us. This enlightenment, not in this lifetime. And if you look at like, well, who really has this omniscient, powerful cities that we can point to as being enlightened? A lot of the gurus that people had faith in turned out to be worse than ordinary people on the street. I like the Dalai Lama. As far as I know, there was no scandal about him. Thich Nhat Hanh, he mentioned, no whiff of scandal about him that I know of. They don't make any special claims. And the Dalai Lama, in fact, has said, okay, he was suffering from a cold at Boyd Guy one time, and he was absent for one teaching, and he came back. He goes, some people think I've got these special powers that I'm doing, and it's like, I don't. I was sick like anyone else. And he just claims to be kind of an ordinary monk. And when COVID happened, I came back to the U.S. and on my YouTube feed, there's a lot of non-dualist people who claim to be awakened or enlightened or God conscious, and I enjoy watching them. And sometimes they're pretty good. Sometimes I think they're a little bit delusional or crazy, or not really. They've had some experience, but then they put it under their own concept. And it's like, okay, maybe you had this extraordinary moment where you saw the unity of things. Well, even when I say the unity of things, someone else might say, I saw God. Or if it was ayahuasca trip, I was speaking with Mother Ayahuasca. You interpret that experience under your own conceptual map. And that will differ. Like there's one non-dualist, she said, well, it's a cliche, there is no self. And said, there's not even illusion. And one thing that a lot of Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism will say, there is illusion. We live in a world of illusion. How can you discount that? It seems like there's these other things here, and then what this other person is saying seems like she's putting a nihilistic filter on her own experience. And then I listened to another talk with her a few weeks later. She said, there is no self, it's all illusion. Well, a few weeks before, as he said, there's not even illusion. Now she's saying there is illusion. So is he changing her point of view? Is he confused here? What's going on? And anybody who claims to be in a high special status or enlightened, the safe rule of thumb is to say they're probably not.
Yeah. And I think as in terms of another, I'm not sure the red flag is necessarily the right word, but something to look for, I think, in a teacher at least, is clarity. Not because again, in the defense of these YouTubers, what they would say is, well, they're trying to get at something which is sort of incommunicable, right? They're trying to talk about something which they can't really put into language. Okay, but even so, like it's still important to to not be like obscurantist, like talk in ways that are intentionally or like impossible to untangle because they're just so nonsensical. Like you still have to be careful about that.
I like Zen, and sometimes I've been accused by some Zen master of being too intellectual because it'll be a koan practice, and I'll find it very interesting. And I used to be a teacher, so I'll start expanding on what the koan might mean philosophically, or what occurred to me, and they won't care for that. And like there's Zen stories of somebody getting too esoteric and the Zen master taking out a stick and whacking the person with it to ground them into the moment. And I'm a big fan of, okay, I believe in non-duality, and I've heard this absolute stuff for a long time, and I'm kind of tired of it. I mean, we do the Heart Sutra and Zen every morning, and Heart Sutra is very non-dualistic. And the danger I feel is there's a good cartoon, the Advaita Trap. I think Jeff Foster has this, where these two non-dual bears get into this argument because this one bear says, "Isn't that a lovely tree?" And the other non-dual bear says, "There is no tree. It's only your projection beauty upon this." And they start arguing, and the non-dual bear will say, "Who is asking the question? Your anger is triggering you. Maybe you should look at it." And I've run into a lot of these non-dual bears, and sometimes when I've asked a question based on duality, like if you ask some of these non-dual bears, say, well, what kind of pizza do you want to share? And they say, there is no me, there is no pizza. And it's like, don't non-dual bear me on this, or the Big Lebowski film,
Sure.
Donnie, the Lebowski mentions a Vladimir Lenin quote, and Donnie doesn't really get it, and he starts going, "I am the walrus. I am the walrus." And sometimes when people go absolute, I'll just say, "I am the walrus," because I'm immune to this because I suffered in Tiruvannamalai, which is the real Neo-Advaita place, and people would tell me that there is no self, there is no me, that I don't really matter, and how my practice is incomplete. And I just got kind of a little bit tired of it. And I like duality, and this is the world that we live in. And it's like, if you reject duality, your non-duality is incomplete. And I saw this good quote on Closer to Truth, where people that put an emphasis on these trance-like states, these high meditation states, eating a pizza can be just as mystical experience as these high jhana-like states. And if you think about what's going on, all the brain signals that are triggered when you eat pizza, it's eating a slice of pizza is just as much as part of the mystery as attaining a high jhana state. And there's less, Zen would call it like enlightenment stink about pizza than there is about high attainment states.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To make an analogy, this is an analogy from outside of Buddhism, but I was raised in the Jewish tradition, and I spent 2 years studying Talmud in yeshiva in Israel, and intensive study, which I think has a lot of similarities to the kind of retreats that people do in the Buddhist tradition. There wasn't meditation there, and that wasn't like even a word in the vocabulary, but there was a sense of getting into a flow state with your interaction with the text. And so insofar as I think meditation is about finding that sort of flow state, we were also doing that for very long hours, for almost the entire day. And one of the teachers that I very much respected and still do respect, used to say, like, a person who's in this flow state of studying Talmud, like, and if you can't hear the cry of a baby in the next room, right? The analogy being like you're like a father, and you're studying your Talmud, and there's a baby crying. If you can't hear the cry of a baby, then your study is worthless, And his point there was like, it's easy to get caught up in like this, high, elevated flow state of like, engaging in the practice. But if if you lose touch with reality, or you're insensitive to someone in pain, let's say, then what's that really worth?
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree. In Tiruvannamalai, which is the home of the Ramana ashram, people walk out of that ashram and they get hit by cars and buses every year, and they may have been in a blissful state and not paying attention, but also delusional thinking. Okay, there is no me, there is no you, there is no bus. And buses, scientists will say the bus is just atoms. It's mostly energy. Everything is one. And there's a saying in the Matrix: there is no spoon. And I can't argue, okay, there's no spoon, but there is a bus, and you should respect that bus. And I think the spiritual path is a wonderful path, and I encourage people, if they have a gap year that they can take and go to do some retreats if they feel called to, that this could be a very good experience. But I don't want people to have a terrible experience and wind up worse off than when they started. And suffering should not be part of the path. Additional delusions should not be part of the path. And unfortunately, you look at all the terrible stories that have happened to people from joining cults or from bad teachers. It's not terribly uncommon.
Yeah. Can you give maybe two examples, two opposite ends of two of the extremes? Some like the highest, most you feel like awakened experience you can remember, really at the peak of your journey, let's say, or whatever that might mean to you, and then like the lowest experience when things like really were not feeling right, not working.
I contend that when you do sitting, when you do meditation, almost anything that can come up will come up. And sometimes almost in one single 1 hour, 2 hour sit, you'll have a wide range of things. And it can be, and you can have an incredibly blissful ecstasy, joy experience. but it doesn't last. The low experiences are very easy to talk about. Sometimes I've been very glad I've never made any claims of being better than anybody else, because I feel like my practice is not very good. I'm feeling kind of sluggish, and I'm glad I don't have anything I have to live up to. There's a good saying I heard one time. It says, I think Ajahn Chah said this: don't be an arhat, don't be a bodhisattva, don't be anything at all, because if you're anything at all, you'll suffer. And there's people on YouTube that claim to be God consciousness, and you think, well, what could be limiting about being God consciousness? I wouldn't like the pressure, of it. I just prefer, not to be anything at all. And I got sick in India. I had a leg infection. I thought it was recurrence of a DVT for my leg, but it wasn't. And I was having night sweats and a fever, and the nights were very difficult. And there was like delusional, feverish thoughts occurring, and one of which, my mother had passed away, but one of the thoughts I was struggling with was, this was under fever, was, okay, what if the assisted living place doesn't work out for my mom? Where would we move her to? And so I was going through these different places in my mind that were options, but none of them were really satisfactory, as good as the ones he was in. And I realized, okay, I'm suffering with this, but it's moot because my mom passed away. And because I was running a fever at this time, basic mindfulness wasn't able to check. And I was just put into suffering on this. So I say, there's a mind-body connection here. And I've used the example of what happens to the enlightened mind when there's food poisoning. Food poisoning, you're throwing up and you're pooping. And, whatever insights, knowledge you may have, may not be occurring to your mind at that moment. Whatever feelings, emotion, peace you have, you're just a victim of your body wanting to do what it has to do. So I'm a big fan of equanimity. I think with a philosophy of equanimity, it allows for different feelings of this. Like ordinarily, if you kind of have a low day, you go, okay, this is a low day. This is what having a low day kind of feels like. And you can explore this, and this will change, and it's part of, the Dharma never promises that there won't be any low days, and that we should be aware that, into our life, most likely there's going to be, old age, sickness, and death. The Buddha called these divine messengers, and you can use these sad thoughts to try to put your mind on higher things.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about, what did you take away from your experience watching your mom pass over an extended period of time? Obviously, and that's not experience. It's not an experience I've had, but it's an experience that many people have had. I'm sure some people watching this will have had that or similar experiences. It's an experience that people like me who haven't had it, there's many people will have it in the future and they don't know it, because it can be a relatively common experience. Yeah. What is a person, how does that experience affect you? How does that sort of change your perspective?
It's a good question. There's a lot of small things that happen when you go through there that can be kind of hard to pinpoint. An analogy I might use is, sometimes there's atomic bomb of an insight or an awakening where it happens and people know it. But then there's also the sun coming up on the mountain analogy, where it's kind of a gradual dawning. And Dogen, the Zen master, said, it's possible you may not even be aware of your own enlightenment. And one of the takeaways, and then there's a lot of things, small things, is I realized memory is not what made my mother my mom. Like, one of the bad questions to ask, and I learned this, but it's such a common habit, is if I didn't see her for a day, I could go in and go, well, how was your yesterday? What did you do yesterday? This is not a good question to ask someone with Alzheimer's because they can't answer it. And a lot of times they feel bad about this. So, if I saw like another resident in the assisted living place and she's got a sweater with a cat on it and saying, oh, that's a nice sweater. It's very present orientated. That's why I think they get along with small children so well. Small children are very present orientated. And, I don't ask, did you ever have a cat? Because that could stump them. I think, do you like cats? And then that gives an opportunity to kind of talk and converse. And also the gift of compassion. I realize if you're able to be kind to another person, it's a great gift on both sides of this. And when my mom was first in there, I would go with her to bingo. And at first she had trouble following the bingo. And so I would have a bingo card and I would play it, but I never claimed any of the prizes because I didn't want the other residents to hate me for taking candy bars. But, I would help my mom fill in her bingo thing. So she didn't miss a bingo check. And, at the end, like a lot of them, she would have a couple candy bars. And after a while, in my mom's room, there's a big stack of candy bars. So I would say, can I take some of these candy bars, give to some of the residents? Because some of the residents didn't win at all because they had hearing issues or something. And so they didn't have any candy bar. And I think that's not really fair. So my mom said, yeah. So I gave some candy bars to this woman and she was happy about it. But then I thought about it, it's a gift for both of us. And what I should do is what I did the next time. I'd say, do you want to give some of your candy bars to one of the residents that didn't win? And so I had my mom give the candy bars. And so the woman was very happy to get the candy bars. And my mom was really happy and saying, did you see her reaction? She really enjoyed getting those candy bars. So those small little details like that aren't really revolutionary insights. And I remember there was a new person, a man, and he was lost. And he was confused getting back to his room. And he asked me for help. So I looked at his room key and took him. And I'm kind of soft-spoken. I'm very equanimous. I said, don't be nervous about this. Realize, anytime you want, you've got this necklace with a button you can press. One of the nice girls, CNAs, will come, and they'll take you to your room. So you can explore for a bit, but if it gets frustrating, just hit your button, and they'll find you and take care of you on there. And there's kind of the same way with my mom because, like the memory issue, one of the questions, Trump took that Alzheimer's test, and he was bragging about it, like man, woman, camera, TV, and said he blew that test away. But the test, when they give it to you, they don't want to make people feel bad taking it when they exhibit difficulties. So they're encouraging about this. And so they're encouraging to even people that have Alzheimer's on this. So people will think, okay, I did real well, but they may not have done so well. And one of the questions is, who's president of the United States? And I was with my mom for hours a day. And so just I was prepping her for this question. And I asked her, I said, well, who's president of the United States? And she couldn't recall. And I gave her a multiple choice. I said, is it Clinton? Is it Bush? Is it Obama? She goes, Obama. So to my mind, this was interesting because it wasn't that she didn't know. It was a recall information. And we all have this issue, which I think, it's easier to identify. It's not a total loss of it. It's just the database of accessing this information wasn't readily available for this. And when the doctor asked her, well, who's president? She goes, I was prepped for this. And she smiled. And but she remembered it from days before that we'd kind of rehearse this one question. It didn't invalidate the question. The whole test is one question out of many, but still it shows information that she was able to remember that, we'd talked about this before.
Yeah, what you're describing in a lot of ways, feels, it has like the cadence or the patience of like a practice, a kind of this living in the present, an emphasis on generosity, selflessness. And it's interesting how life can throw us in situations, which I don't know, maybe the real thing. It's like the real thing maybe, as opposed to um, what spiritual traditions maybe are like an echo of, in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Well, I like traveling, and I've been to India, Nepal, and Thailand, different places, but people don't need to go to those places to go down the path. And on my book, I have a unit that I really like, and it's very conducive to daily practice. You have to be out in the world to really benefit from it. It's equanimity and kindness, because you need other people to challenge your equanimity. And when these issues and problems happen, it's grist for the mill. And the other thing, for kindness, you need other people. And if I was in the grocery store, and this woman asked me if I could get something from a top shelf, and I'm pretty tall, so I got it, and I was really happy to do it, because as a kindness practice, you're looking to do something nice every day. There's a good book by Karen Armstrong I mentioned in my guide about living a more compassionate life, which I really recommend. And she said, "Thank you." And then I didn't think about it, but I said, "Thank you," because I was really appreciative of the fact that she gave me the opportunity to do this. And there's an interesting tidbit I heard about when people go for job interviews, that if you mess something up where they have to help you, like you drop your briefcase, your portfolio, and it has all your papers in it, and then they bend down and help you pick it up, they will give you a higher interviewee mark than if they hadn't ever done that. So I thought that was kind of interesting there. And so you don't have to go to India and find the guru of your dreams. If you're working with other people, you have the opportunity to try to do one kind thing a day, thinking of other people. And you also have the opportunity to develop your equanimity, because if you're in a bubble center where everything is taken care of for you, and everybody's acting all spiritual and kind, maybe it's not. There still can be problematic people even in monasteries and centers, but maybe easier to practice out in the real world, where there's stresses of family, work.
Yeah. I was really moved by your story. And yeah, I remember, I know enough of similar experiences to know that it's important, to think, to realize that that's part of life in a way, and not everyone is prepared for those situations, but you have to be prepared for those situations, because if you're not prepared, then it's a deep tragedy to not be able to step up in those situations. And there's one thing that you said which I think was really profound, and I want to just highlight it. And now today I agree with what you said, and I think it's really profound, and I agree with it. But if you asked me a year ago or whatever, I would not have agreed with it. And you said that your mom was more than her memories, and I think the experience of other people, like in books that I've read, for example, I read How We Die by Sherwood B. Newland a long time ago. I read it, but it had a section on there on Alzheimer's and experiences. And a lot of people, I think, come away from that experience saying this person is only their memories. And once you lose the memory, then they're not the same person anymore, in the sense that, they're just, there's nothing there, and you can explore this in the realm of like thought experiments, like if you do a memory transfer from one body to another. But what you're saying is that, there's a sense of there's something else beyond memories, which persists. And I think that's really profound.
Yeah, I joke, memories are kind of overrated. We can delude ourselves about memories, and memories can make a good story, but does it define who you are? Like when you're talking on this podcast today, you can present yourself as you are right at this moment, where memory may have an impact on what you say and do. But if you didn't have recall to them, if you had total amnesia, but you were still, the people said personality wise, you were still the same, amici, then I don't want to make slight of some people's memory loss could be different than what my mom experienced. I don't have a wide experience with Alzheimer's. I know some people, they have like, deep personality changes there. This is kind of what I found on this. And what I would try to do was, try not to ask questions that resulted in memory. And, it was very interesting to me because sometimes, like, there's a moment of silence, and I would use that for like just I'm okay with just sitting and being silent. And after a bit, my mother's just sitting there, and I would say, "What are you thinking?" And I did that a lot. And my mother would be thinking something that was very relevant, that was kind of pertinent to the situation. And another thing is I'm paraphrasing the story because it was a news story and I don't have it exactly right, but the theme of it, the key of it is right, was there was somebody who had been trapped in a blizzard. And I think her husband went out to try to get help. And I think he might have died, but the woman stayed in the car. And for a few days, finally, there was help there. And she was delusional. And so she went through some delusional states, like, she's waking up in her bed. Then she's out like in a completely different place. Then she's at work. Then she's at car. And she's not even really kind of sure of her own reality because of this, delusional. And I was telling this to my sister, who my mother was there, and she hadn't said a word. She was a lot of times very quiet. But my mother did say something then. She goes, "That's the way I feel." And my sister and I looked at each other and thinking, what could that be like?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's intense. And again, just to state the obvious, maybe, I feel like it's clear maybe to anyone who's followed the conversation until now, but if anyone ever doubts, what's the purpose of sitting? Like, why would you have a practice that involves just sitting and doing nothing? I mean, I think the time sometimes in our life of, the greatest, moral urgency, like the greatest existential need, and we're called upon to behave and to be our best selves, often requires just being able to sit with another person who's suffering. And I feel like in our modern world, that's not something we're even in touch with. Yeah. The kindness and the power of just being a compassionate presence, and who could do that? I mean, even now, myself, thinking of myself, it's hard for me to sit. It's hard for me to sit. It's so hard just to sit. And sometimes that's what life calls on us to do, and that's what we need to do.
Why is it hard?
My mind. I was raised from a young age to always be thinking of something. To always be thinking of the next project or the next and a racing mind, which is my natural predisposition, makes like just sitting still painful sometimes.
Okay. Now your mind is thinking a lot, but you're still sitting. You mentioned, though, it's painful. What about this is painful?
Well, I can answer you because let's give a little bit of more details. So I've tried to do about 20 minutes a day of sitting meditation, and that's about what I'm capable of doing on a daily basis. And it took me a while to get there. And when I'm at the limit of what I can do, I can easily put myself now in that mind frame. It's just I think of things that are on my to-do list. I'm thinking of memories that I don't want to be thinking about. I'm imagining things I don't want to be imagining, and it feels like my mind is out of control. And I'm proud I could do 20 minutes, but even beyond 20 minutes, it starts to get really hard. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I can explain this, but I think you're being very hard on yourself. And if you look upon whatever happens during meditation is the subject of meditation, and congratulate yourself that you're able to recognize this. So let's talk about your to-do list. You have to appreciate that aspect of your subconscious that wants you to be organized, that doesn't want you to forget. Now, in a perfect world, you could tell it, okay, relax, chill. It's just 20 minutes, and I'll get back to you. I like Jack Kornfield. Sometimes when he has these other thoughts that interrupt, he goes, "Well, thank you for your input." And I think this is a good response. So you notice, okay, it's a to-do list. Label it to-do list. Then is there an accompanying judgment on this? You think, I shouldn't be thinking about this to-do list while I'm meditating. Meditation's supposed to be all peacefulness and content and blissful, blah, blah, blah. It's not. It doesn't have to be that way at all. It is what it is. And I like the story of U Tanganyika. I like U Tanganyika a lot. And he had a shop that he would attend that his parents owned in Rangoon. And he couldn't do any formal meditation because he's running a shop. But when he could, he would look at, what is my mind doing right now? And what is my accompanying judgment of this? He did short meditations many times a day, and he gained a lot of benefit from this. And I think sometimes people have a wrong idea. Meditation should be this. And when it's not that, you think, I'm a terrible meditator. Well, whatever happens, you thinking you're a terrible meditator, whatever happens that this judgment that it's painful, if you look upon it as saying, your job is to investigate what is the true reality of your mind, whatever it is, whatever it wants to show you. And it can be some dark, deep thoughts. And I remember my first Toisu Thep one, and it's a long time to be quiet. And it says, look, I'm going to bring some stuff up you might not want to see. Are you sure you want to go there, Wolf? And it gave me pause, because there's some things I've done, like everybody, that I'm not proud of, that I'm ashamed of. And I realized, I reflected on this, and I realized it's coming really from a place of love. This message that, is trying to warn me about this, he wants to protect me. And, I thought, okay, I'm in a safe spot in this retreat center. I go, show me whatever you want to show me. Bring it on. Now, I wouldn't recommend this if somebody just had a divorce and lost their job and their dog died. It would be too much. However, what happened was there was nothing that was shown to me that was overwhelming at all. And then that aspect just disappeared for me. That fear of going so deep into some dark thoughts. And it reminds me, I had a friend, and he talked about, he was in high school and they were in a chemistry lab, and he had a partner, and this thought occurred to him, said, I should take this chemical liquid and throw it in this girl's face. And it's one of those random brain thoughts. And he goes, no, I don't want to do this. And the brain goes, come on, it'll be funny. And he was disturbed by this. And so I Googled this, like, is this common for people to have these
intrusive thoughts? Yeah.
These thoughts. Yeah. And it is. And once you realize this is kind of normal, like I'm a veteran meditator. I could be meditating, and all of a sudden Game of Thrones and how the last season was such a disaster may come up. And I'm thinking, I spent all this money, plane ticket to come to India. I'm trying to, I'm ranting about the last season of Game of Thrones. What the hell is going on here? Shouldn't you be beyond this? Other people, these YouTube arahats, they're having these blissful, wonderful, God-conscious experience, and I'm venting about Game of Thrones last season. However, or one of my red thoughts, I have Game of Thrones last season rant. My judgment on this, it's justified, and I'll laugh a little bit about it. And I may go back to the breath, or counting the breath, or just sitting, or just saying, okay, has this thought played out enough? Where did this Game of Thrones thought even come from? It's like it just appeared, and then after a while it will disappear, and we start thinking about, I wonder what's for lunch. I wonder if I'll like what what's for lunch here.
Yeah. Well, that's something I'm definitely going to take with me from this conversation, and I really appreciate that. I guess one last question. We've been going for a really wonderful chunk of time. I'm very appreciative of your time. What do you think about reincarnation, or what happens when we die? Do you think about that at all? If you had a choice to be reincarnated or to not be reincarnated, what would you choose? How do you think about those things?
Optimum. There's Pure Land Buddhism, which is very conducive to becoming enlightened. However, weekends, if I can, I would like to go to the pleasure planet, maybe the planet of the wild sorority girls. And it's not totally selfish, sensual reasons there, but I can also talk about, Buddhism to them, along with the beach volleyball games. In my mind, that would be a good way to do
Paradise.
it.
Yeah.
I think death is kind of a mystery. I don't know exactly what will happen. I'm curious because there's this TV show called The Good Place. I don't know if
Sure.
you've seen that, and it's very hard to come up with a good place that would be a good place for everybody for eternity. And I watched different shows, and I think there's a Netflix one called After Death, and they had these psychics on, and psychics and channelers, when they give a message from grandma, it's very routine. Grandmother loves you. Don't be sad. She's proud of you. And what I'm really curious about is, how does grandma spend her day? And none of the sages, prophets, have ever said on a day-to-day basis what afterlife really is like. Like, is there myriad issues there? Do you still do your hobbies? Do you travel? Can you travel the universe? Are there love affairs? Are there pets? What if grandma gave her daily itinerary? In my mind, this would be very interesting to see what happens after death. But they never do that, and none of the sages or prophets,
So you're
seem to.
agnostic. You're agnostic. You're saying you don't have an opinion. You don't have a perspective.
I love that agnosticism, and when I was at Bodhi Zendo, that's the Zen center that's run by the Jesuits. My last trip there, I started going to mass, and I think saying, "Well, I don't know," is it's a good Zen answer, and it works for me. And people say, "Well, what do you believe?" You may not know whether there's a God or not. What do you believe? It depends on the day, and sometimes, and it depends on how you define God, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think there is something after death. I think there is something, and what that something is will be a great adventure.
Wonderful. Wolf, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an really energizing and inspiring conversation.
Hey, me too. I enjoyed it, and thank you very much. I appreciate it.